Welcome to Restoration. My name is Matt. So glad you could join us on this Shabbat or whatever day you're watching this message as we continue our series, The Blood Brothers, the story of the sons of Jacob. Even when life feels chaotic, deceptive, cruel, God is present behind the scenes. And in the Joseph story, the pit, the wilderness, the betrayal of his brothers, it reveals our false selves, but also God's hidden hand, which shapes our real selves through waiting, suffering, and obedience. So before we jump back into Joseph, we look at the crouching beast that's introduced to us in Genesis chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. It says, "Then Adonai said to Cain, 'Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, it will lift. But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the doorway, and its desire is for you, but you must master it.'" Sin is crouching at the doorway. The Hebrew image is a wild animal that is low to the ground and ready to pounce. And the same strategy, the same beast that slithered into Eden, it twists desire, distorts identity, fractures relationships. Joseph's brothers are replaying that story at the end of Genesis. Envy, fear, wounded pride, they're pressing the false self forward. So today's message is called Crouching Beast, Hidden God. Just like Cain, we often feel a lurking threat, an inner voice pressing us towards envy, anger, or control. And the crouching beast isn't just ancient history. It lives in our modern relationships and jobs and decisions. That is Joseph's world, but it's also ours. A world where the crouching beast tries to guide the story, but the hidden God quietly redeems it. So we start again in Genesis 37 and verse 18. "Now the brothers saw Joseph from a distance, and before he was close to them, they plotted together against him in order to kill him. And they said to one another, 'Here comes the master of dreams. Come on now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those pits so we can say that an evil animal devoured him. Then let's see what becomes of his dreams.'" Now, Joseph's brothers thought they were ending a dream, but really God was just at the beginning. "Let's kill him," they say of his brother, their own brother. And we do the same thing, maybe not to the point of death, but we justify bad behavior for reasons that feel good. Things like sarcasm, envy, control, selfish ambition. It's our false selves pressing forward while our real selves are broken. We talked about it last week in The Real You, Part 3, where Paul calls these things the deeds of the flesh and contrasts them with the fruits of the Spirit. So as we look at the crouching beast and hidden God, there are many disguises in these chapters of Genesis. It starts with God being disguised because he's somewhat hidden. He spoke and showed up physically to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And in the beginning of chapter 37, God kind of goes silent. He's present in the story, but he doesn't speak like he did before. And he won't again until he speaks to Moses at the burning bush in Exodus. That's 400 years from the last time he speaks to Jacob in Genesis until he speaks to Moses at the beginning of Exodus. Maybe you remember, like I do, Transformers, more than meets the eye. Transformers, robots in disguise. I can't do a robot. I'm trying, but there is more than meets the eye with all of the disguises in Genesis. Remember, Jacob, their father, disguised himself with the skin of a goat to make his father Isaac believe he was his brother Esau, and all to steal a blessing. And by the end of the story, with Joseph and his brothers, Joseph will be disguised as an Egyptian that the brothers do not recognize because he speaks with an interpreter, and he looks like an Egyptian and talks like an Egyptian. Okay, we disguise ourselves all the time. Selfishness as success, control as care, doing it for the Lord as self-serving motives. And one way I have disguised myself most in the course of my life is sarcasm. And a few years ago, my counselor said this to me. He said, sarcasm is the enemy of vulnerability. It's taken me quite a long time to see and work to change how my brain is wired from years of living with sarcasm, which was just a defense mechanism to mask vulnerability. So sarcasm is a form of speech that mocks and ridicules or expresses contempt, often by saying the opposite of what one truly means. Sarcasm creates a barrier between the speaker and the ones they're speaking to. It prevents honest connection. While it may feel clever or protective, sarcasm conceals vulnerability and it blocks the heart from growing and genuine intimacy, while hiding behind irony and mockery. In contrast, vulnerability is the willingness to openly acknowledge and express one's true feelings, fears, and needs, even at the risk of discomfort or rejection. Now, vulnerability exposes the heart and invites honest connection. It allows others to see who we really are. It fosters trust and creates space for growth and healing and authentic relationship. And if you're taking notes, you should write this down. Sarcasm shields the self. Vulnerability reveals the self. Now here's a simple step you can do. You can choose one area of your life where you've hidden behind sarcasm, control, or pride this week and name it honestly to God or to a trusted friend. Let vulnerability start to break the cycle of disguise. Vulnerability is scary because you risk being rejected, but it also opens the door to healing and authentic relationships. Look at the sarcasm of the brothers in verse 19. Here comes the master of dreams. The brothers see him coming from a distance, and they sarcastically call him the master of dreams. They mock him as he comes toward them with sarcasm. They hate Joseph's dreams because in the dreams they bow down to their little brother. And they hate Joseph because he's their father's favorite son. And they hate Joseph because they're jealous and envious and angry and hurt. And ironically, their sarcasm names what God will make true, that Joseph will become the master of dreams, and he's going to save the whole world, including them, from a famine because of his dream interpretations. And as I was writing the message, I was thinking, man, what would it have looked like if the brothers responded with vulnerability instead of sarcasm? What if instead of verse 20, come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits so we can say that an evil animal devoured him. Then let's see what becomes of his stupid dreams. Imagine if they had responded with vulnerability. And they turn to each other as they're seeing him coming from a distance. And one of them says, I'm really hurt by Dad's favoritism. And I'm pretty pissed at Joseph. I want to kill him, but I know that's not right. So maybe when he gets here, we should all just sit around the fire and talk about our pain and feelings. See, vulnerability could have opened dialogue and prevented all of the drama. Instead, of course, they throw him into a pit. Verse 21. Reuben heard and rescued him out of their hands, saying, No, let's not kill him. In order to rescue him from their hand and return him to his father, Reuben said, don't shed blood. Throw him into a pit. That's better. Here in the wilderness. But don't lay a hand on him. Now, Reuben, as the firstborn son of all 12, was meant to lead the family and protect his younger brothers. But earlier in Genesis, he abdicated his moral authority because he slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah, who's the mother of two of his half-brothers, Dan and Naphtali. And even though he intends to rescue Joseph, he is not present at the critical moment, probably because it was his turn to watch the sheep. His plan is left incomplete, and he cannot control the jealousy and the rage of his brothers. Verse 23. So as soon as Joseph came up to the brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the long-sleeve tunic that he had on, and then they took him and threw him into the pit. Now, the pit was empty with no water in it. Now the pit in Dothan, which means two pits, are cisterns that are deep and dark and far from God. They reinforce this wilderness motif in Scripture: emptiness, danger, disconnected. It's the opposite of Joseph's dreams, where he's a star in the sky with the sun and the moon, and now he's in this deep, dark ground. He's in the ground in a dark pit. And Dothan is on the direct trade route connecting Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. And if they don't end up in Dothan, Joseph can't be thrown into a pit. If they're not there, then he's not sold into slavery. And then he does not end up in Egypt, and then everyone dies in a famine. And so even in the pit, God is shaping Joseph's path towards redemption, while his brothers share a meal. It's very kind of them. So they sat down to eat bread. The fact that they sat down to eat bread is significant because the pit is the wilderness, and the wilderness is far from God and far from the Garden of Eden. When you're in the promised land, you're near God's presence and you have everything you need. When you're outside of it, you're running from God and there's scarcity. In the wilderness, they provide for themselves, but not their little brother. And when you're with God, He provides bread to eat. Now, the next in line after Reuben would be Simeon and Levi. But Simeon and Levi, the second and third born, abdicate their leadership roles earlier in Genesis when they murdered the entire town of Shechem because of the mistreatment of their sister. And this is where Judah, the fourth born, steps up and proposes a calculated plan because he's next in line. Verse 26, then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come on, let's just sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let's not lay a hand on him, since he's our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. And they listened to Judah because he's next in line to be in charge, because the first three abdicated their responsibilities. And his brilliant idea is, let's not kill him. Let's just sell him. Oh, that's much better, Judah. Sorry, that was really sarcastic. And notice who the brothers sell Joseph to. The Ishmaelites. Or is it the Midianites? Well, it actually seems like it's both. Verse 28. When some men, Midianite merchants, passed by, they dragged Joseph up and out of the pit, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. Now, here's what you need to know. In Genesis 37 in Hebrew, there's actually three groups. The Yishmaelim, the Ishmaelites, are the descendants of Hagar, who Abraham has Ishmael with. The Midianites, or the Midianim, are descendants of Midian, who is a son of Abraham and his third wife, Keturah. The Medanites, which is not the Mennonites, they weren't involved. They're German. That comes later. The Medanites are descendants of Medin, the Medanim, and it's another son of Abraham and Keturah. What's interesting is the emphasis in Hebrew is that everyone who Joseph is sold to they are not strangers. They are the extended family of Abraham. They're all descendants of Abraham. The sons of Jacob, the sons of Ishmael, and the sons of Keturah. Nahum Sarna, the biblical scholar, says the fact that those who had a hand in the sale of Joseph into foreign slavery were his own kinfolk serves to heighten the tragedy. And Tim Mackey puts it beautiful in his Joseph class. He says, the appearance of the Ishmaelites and the Midianites includes the wider family of Abraham in the betrayal, so that the entire line of Abraham's blessed lineage is caught up, inadvertently or deliberately, in a betrayal that will fracture the family, only to bring it together in the ultimate reunification under Joseph's reign in Egypt. See, the brothers know it. The traders know it. Everyone is participating in the betrayal of one of their own family. And God is setting the stage for the healing of Abraham's fractured family. Behind the layers of disguise and deception and denial, God is already weaving reconciliation for his entire family and for the whole world. So Joseph sold for 20 shekels of silver, which in the Code of Hammurabi and other writings of the ancient Near East is the standard price for a slave. Verse 39, then Reuben returned to the pit, and he saw that Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. The reason why Reuben's tearing his clothes is that this is a ritual act in the ancient Near East, everywhere, not just among ancient Israel. And it signals visible, tangible grief. You tear your clothes. The act makes his internal chaos and despair concrete. And destroying a garment, a valued covering, mirrors the rupture he feels inside. It's crazy because later in the narrative, in Genesis 42, when they're talking in front of Joseph, who looks like an Egyptian, Reuben still seems unaware that his brothers sold Joseph into slavery. I don't think he told them. They told him. He assumes that Joseph is dead, and that's why he mourns as if he's dead, because that's what he was trying to stop his brothers from doing. So he returned to his brothers, and he said, "The boy's gone. And where should I go?" What Reuben is saying here is, I've already failed our father and our family. And now I failed at protecting my brother from the rest of you. I can't go home. I can't stand before my father. Where can I even go? So they come up with an even more deceptive plan, a cover-up for what happened. And they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a billy goat, and they dipped the tunic into blood. This is where the cycle of deception intensifies as the brothers slaughter a goat and dip Joseph's robe in its blood. And they send this false message of his death to their father. This act echoes the deception of Jacob, who disguised himself to deceive his family. The brothers' outward act masks their inward betrayal, and even the robe itself becomes a symbol of a counterfeit substitution. The goat is a false sacrifice. It points forward to God's ultimate provision in the later sacrificial system. But the goat's blood acts to show human substitution at work. Just as Abel was lost to Cain because Cain murdered him, God provided Seth as a replacement. Human sin, this is important, human sin never derails God's plan. In Joseph's story, the brothers' betrayal becomes the soil for God's redemptive purposes in a pit. God's plan for restoration cannot be stopped, no matter how broken the relationships. Verse 32, it says, so they sent the long-sleeve tunic, and it was brought to their father, and they said, we found this. Do you recognize whether it is or not it is your son's tunic? And he recognized it, and he said, my son's tunic, an evil animal has devoured him. Joseph must be torn to pieces. Now, the phrase, an evil animal, is really important. In Hebrew, it's chaya ra'ah. It's this evil animal that devoured Joseph. But it's a phrase that echoes Eden and the Garden of Eden and Cain. The animal is a metaphor for deception and sin. Just as the serpent deceived Eve and sin crouched at Cain's door, human treachery is masquerading as a tragic event. The animal's not literal. It represents the very strategy of sin and deception that shapes the story behind the scenes. Envy, schemes, and false substitutes act like this crouching animal distorting reality and tempting us away from God. Even when it seems that the evil has succeeded, God is still at work, taking human schemes and turning them into a resurrection story. But just as Joseph's brothers hid behind deception, we too hide behind deception of our false selves. Envy, control, sarcasm, they take the lead. And the evil animal still crouches at our door today, tempting us to act out from fear or pride rather than from God's word. Now, for the next 20 years, they're all going to suffer pain and shame and guilt for this very long con and deception. And of course, in mourning, Jacob also tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth, and he mourned his son many days. Verse 35 says, all his sons got up along with all of his daughters to console him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, I will go down to Sheol to my son mourning. So his father kept weeping for him. Now there's one line which is sort of like, meanwhile, back at the ranch. Joseph in verse 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him into Egypt, to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh, and the commander of bodyguards. But this is so much fun, because in Hebrew, it's not the commander of bodyguards. In Hebrew, it's the captain of the butchers. And you have to understand the imagery of violence and betrayal. The false substitution of a goat to cover the brother's sin leads Joseph directly to the captain of the butchers. The brothers claimed that their brother was butchered by an evil animal, and now Joseph ends up with the captain of the butchers in Egypt. It is Hebrew wordplay at its finest. And there's a deeper theological pattern in this crouching beast, hidden God. Just as the evil animal, the serpent in Eden, used disguise to introduce sin, humans substitute the false for the true. We worship appearances we worship creation rather than the Creator. And on all these layers of disguise and substitution and betrayal, God's hidden work is at hand, turning human evil into instruments of his covenantal promise. The pattern in the Joseph story, descent into the pit and betrayal by his brothers and handed over by his extended family, sold to the nations, to Egypt, and ultimately raised to new life, points to something far greater. Joseph's suffering is not just a family tragedy. It reaches across the entire Abrahamic family through the Ishmaelites and the Midianites and the Medanites. His pain becomes the means through which God saves the entire family of Abraham and also will save all of the nations. This pattern finds its fullest expression in Yeshua, our Messiah. Just as Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, Yeshua will be betrayed by his own people. And just as Joseph was handed over to Egypt, which at the time represented the whole world, Yeshua is handed over to Rome, which in his time represents the whole world. And just as Joseph descended into a pit before rising to rule, Yeshua descended into death before rising to life. And in both stories, what seems like the end becomes the beginning of redemption. Human deception, jealousy, false substitutes, they cannot stop God's purposes. And the pit becomes a pathway. The cross becomes victory. The hidden God is still at work today. And that brings us to us. Like Joseph's brothers, we often lean on false substitutes, things we trust more than God. Control becomes a substitute for peace. Success becomes a substitute for significance. Sarcasm is a substitute for vulnerability. Money, busyness, ministry, our image, all can replace the real thing. But God doesn't want your substitutes. He wants you, your real self, your honest self, your vulnerable self, the self he created, not the masks that we make for ourselves. I want to invite you today to step out of hiding and into transformation, to stop pretending, to stop managing outcomes, to stop covering pain with sarcasm or control, and let God meet you in the pit, the place we fear most, so that your true self can be woken up. What the brothers meant to end as a dream, God begins to fulfill the dream. What looks like chaos in your life may be the very place that God is forming something new in you. And our false substitutes, control, success, sarcasm, busyness, they're always crouching at the door, tempting us to follow the wrong voice. And we encounter forces trying to steer us away from God. But God calls us to stand firm, to trust in him, and let him redeem what looks like chaos. Peter warns us in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Stay alert. Watch out. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, searching for someone to devour. But stand firm against him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being laid upon your brothers and sisters throughout the world. Look, the pit, the betrayal, and God who's hiding in the background. It all reminds us that God's work isn't always visible. What seems like chaos or failure can be the very place that he shapes our true selves and calls us into his redemptive story. We are not the only ones to experience this. That's what Peter's saying. And history shows us that suffering and betrayal and trials are all part of the human story, but God's hidden hand is always at work. So as we close, we ask ourselves, how does God want to awaken our real selves? And how will we respond? And here's a few steps you can take. First, you have to identify your false substitutes. Ask the Holy Spirit, what am I leaning on instead of God? Is it approval, control, success, avoidance, image, whatever it is? Then invite God to expose them and replace them with his Spirit, his presence, and his word. The second thing you can do is face your feelings and let God shape you. You gotta name what you're actually feeling. Like what's underneath the things that you're experiencing. Fear, envy, anger, insecurity, rather than hiding those things behind sarcasm, bravado, or withdrawal. Friends, vulnerability is not weakness. It is the doorway to healing. And the pit is not punishment, it's formation. God shapes our real selves in deep, dark places. The last is you can trust God's redemption in the chaos. Even when you can't see him, God is working behind the scenes. Believe it. You got to release bitterness and self-judgment. Let God turn what was meant for evil into blessing. You can choose to participate in his redemptive story and become a vessel of restoration to your family, to your community, and to the whole world around you. I love you guys, and we're going to keep rolling through this series for some time into the new year, and I hope you come back and keep rolling with us through Blood Brothers.